on the floor.
Early hours of August 13, the quiet Colorado neighborhood was still asleep when Chris Watts backed his truck into the driveway. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary workday beginning. No sirens, no raised voices, no visible chaos. But what unfolded on a neighbor's surveillance camera would later become one of the most debated moments in modern true crime. Years after the murders of Shannon Watts and her children, investigators, analysts, and online sleuths continued to examine every second of that footage. One theory in particular drew intense attention: a brief movement beneath Chris Watts' truck, what some viewers believed was a shadow that didn't belong. To some, it was nothing more than visual noise. To others, it was the missing piece of the puzzle. This chapter is not about accusations or conclusions. It's about how a single detail captured on video became the center of renewed scrutiny, and why it continues to divide opinion to this day. The surveillance footage shows Chris making multiple trips between the house and his truck. His movements appear calm, almost methodical. There is no visible struggle, no obvious sign of urgency. But when the video is slowed down and enhanced, some viewers claim to see a small figure-like shadow moving briefly near the rear of the vehicle. Supporters of the theory argue that this moment contradicts Chris Watts' original statements and raises questions about the timeline. Critics argue that the footage is too grainy, too low resolution, and too easily misinterpreted to support such claims. What makes this moment so powerful is not just what may, or may not, be visible. It's the fact that this footage exists at all, silently recording a man who would later confess to one of the most shocking family annihilations in recent history. As we move forward, we'll examine what the footage actually shows, what experts say about video interpretation, and why this shadow became such a focal point in the public's search for truth. If you appreciate evidence-based breakdowns like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Cold Truth Achieve True Crime. Your support helps keep these investigations going. The surveillance video from that morning became one of the most closely examined pieces of evidence in the Chris Watts case. Recorded by a neighbor's security camera across the street, the footage was never designed to capture detail. It was meant to monitor movement, not reveal truth. Yet over time, it was slowed down, zoomed in, stabilized, and replayed thousands of times by investigators and the public alike. At normal speed, the video shows Chris Watts walking back and forth between the house and his truck. He opens doors, leans inside, and pauses as if organizing items. Nothing appears dramatic. Nothing immediately signals violence. This is exactly why the footage unsettled so many people later, because it looks ordinary. When slowed down, however, one moment stands out. Near the rear passenger side of the truck, a brief shadow appears to move across the driveway. Some viewers believe this movement is inconsistent with Chris's body position and timing. They argue it appears lower to the ground, shorter, and separate from his own shadow. This is the moment that fueled intense debate. Others strongly disagree. Video experts point out that security cameras often distort light and motion, especially in low resolution. Shadows can stretch, split, or flicker depending on angle, headlights, and nearby objects. A passing cloud, a tree branch, or even compression artifacts can create the illusion of movement where none exists. What complicates matters further is human perception. Once viewers are told what to look for, their brains often fill in gaps automatically. This is known as pattern recognition bias, the tendency to see meaning in ambiguity. In a case as emotionally charged as this one, that effect becomes even stronger. Despite the controversy, it's important to note one key fact. The footage was reviewed by law enforcement early in the investigation. While it contributed to understanding Chris Watts' movements, it was not officially cited as proof of a separate individual or additional action. Still, the video remains powerful, not because of what it definitively shows, but because of how much it invites interpretation. As the surveillance footage circulated online, it didn't take long before independent analysts and true crime communities began breaking it down on their own terms. Frame-by-frame screenshots, contrast adjustments, and slowed playback versions flooded forums and video platforms. Among these discussions, a particular group of online investigators argued that the case still held unanswered questions, and that the driveway footage was the key. These analysts approached the video differently than law enforcement had. Instead of focusing only on timelines, they searched for anomalies, moments that felt out of place when replayed repeatedly. The shadow beneath the truck became central to this effort. Supporters of the theory suggested that the movement aligned with a sequence that had not been fully explained during early public briefings. What made these interpretations spread rapidly was presentation. Videos were narrated confidently, visuals were highlighted with outlines and zooms, and viewers were guided toward specific conclusions. For many watching, the argument felt persuasive, especially when paired with emotional music and carefully chosen pauses. But with influence came controversy. Critics argued that these analyses relied heavily on assumptions rather than verified data. Video professionals pointed out that repeated compression and re-uploading can significantly alter how footage appears. Each time the video was edited, clarity decreased, increasing the chance of misinterpretation. Another factor was trust. Some viewers felt that official investigations had moved too quickly, leaving room for doubt. Online analysts filled that space by offering alternative explanations, whether supported or not. In true crime culture, unanswered questions often become magnets for speculation. It's also important to recognize that these online discussions did not change the legal outcome of the case. Chris Watts confessed, pled guilty, and was sentenced. No additional charges or findings were introduced based on the shadow theory. Still, the conversation persisted because it tapped into a deeper need many viewers have: the need to understand how something so horrific could happen without warning. The power of these online narratives lies not in proof, but in persuasion. If you value calm, evidence-focused analysis instead of speculation, like the video and subscribe to Cold Truth Achieve True Crime. In Chapter 4, we'll examine what experts say about interpreting surveillance footage and where the line between analysis and assumption truly lies. As debate over the driveway footage intensified, professionals in video forensics and digital imaging weighed in with a more cautious perspective. Their message was consistent. Surveillance footage can be misleading, especially when viewed outside its original technical context. Understanding how cameras record images is essential before drawing conclusions. Most residential security cameras operate at low frame rates and reduced resolution, particularly in early morning or low-light conditions. To compensate for darkness, these cameras automatically adjust exposure, which can cause shadows to stretch, blur, or momentarily detach from their source. Headlights turning on or off, even briefly, can dramatically alter how shapes appear on the ground. Experts also point to compression artifacts. When video files are stored, transferred, and re-uploaded, data is lost. This loss can create flickers, distortions, or ghosting effects, visual glitches that resemble movement but are not tied to real objects. The more a clip is edited, zoomed, or slowed down, the greater the risk of these artifacts being mistaken for something meaningful. Another critical factor is perspective. The camera capturing the Watts driveway was positioned at an angle and distance that flattened depth. Objects closer to the lens appear larger, while those farther away blend into shadows. Without multiple camera angles, determining size, distance, or identity becomes nearly impossible. Professionals stress an important rule. Video evidence must be interpreted alongside corroborating facts, timelines, physical evidence, witness statements, and confessions. On its own, a single ambiguous visual moment cannot outweigh a complete body of evidence. That doesn't mean viewers are wrong to ask questions. Scrutiny is natural, especially in a case that shocked so many. But experts warn that when interpretation replaces verification, conclusions can drift far from reality. In the end, the shadow under the truck sits in a gray area, not proven evidence, not fully dismissible illusion, but a reminder of how fragile visual certainty can be. To understand why the driveway footage sparked so much debate, it must be compared directly to what Chris Watts himself said during the investigation. His early statements, given before his confession, described a routine morning, one where he claimed to have left for work without incident after an emotional conversation inside the house.
WATTS.
Wow. What's going on right now around your house?
Right now it's got K9 units, the sheriff's department. Everybody's like they're doing their best right now to figure out like if they can get a scent and see where they went. If they went on foot, they went in a car, they went somewhere. And right now it's just like they've been on point. They're going through the house trying to get a scent, and hopefully they can pick something up to where it's going to lead to something.
What happened? Your wife came home. Tell me what's.
She came home from the airport 2 a.m. and I left around 5:15. She was still here, and like about 12:10 in that afternoon, her friend Nicole showed up at the door. Like I had texted Shanann a few times that day, called her, say but she never got back to me. But she wasn't getting back to any of her people as well, and that's what really concerned a lot of people. Is like if she's not getting back to her, like if she doesn't get back to me, that's fine. Like she gets busy during the day, but she didn't get back to her people, which was very concerning. And Nicole called me when she was at the door, and that's when I came home. And then walked in the house, and nothing was vanished. Nothing was here. I mean, she wasn't here. The kids weren't here. Nobody was here.
What's your wife's name?
Shanann, SHANNN.
What's your kids' name?
Bella and Celeste.
At first, investigators focused on timing. Phone records, GPS data, and neighbor surveillance helped establish a narrow window between when Shannon Watts returned home and when Chris left the driveway. The video confirmed that window, showing Chris loading his truck and departing at a time consistent with digital records. However, what the video does not show is just as important as what it does. There is no visible struggle, no rushing, and no interruption. Chris appears calm, almost detached. This demeanor became one of the most unsettling aspects of the footage and a major reason people later re-examined it so closely. When Chris eventually confessed, he provided details about events that took place before he left the house. His confession aligned with physical evidence recovered later, including findings at his work site. From a legal standpoint, this alignment mattered far more than ambiguous video imagery. Supporters of alternative interpretations argue that his statements evolved over time, which is true. But investigators expect inconsistencies during interrogations, especially in cases involving deception. What ultimately mattered was not whether every early statement was accurate, but whether the final account matched verifiable evidence. Law enforcement did not treat the driveway footage as a standalone truth source. Instead, it was one piece of a larger puzzle, useful for confirming movement and timing, but insufficient on its own to redefine the case. This distinction is critical. When timelines, digital data, and confessions converge, ambiguous visuals lose evidentiary weight. Years after the case was legally closed, the shadow theory continues to resurface, and that persistence says as much about public psychology as it does about the evidence itself. High-profile crimes rarely fade quietly, especially when they involve familiar settings, family dynamics, and unanswered emotional questions. The Watts case sits firmly in that category. One reason the theory endures is ambiguity. The surveillance footage does not provide clear answers, and the human mind struggles with unresolved visuals. When something looks almost explainable but not entirely clear, people return to it again and again. Hopping repetition will produce certainty.
Revealed about Chris Watts, the dad who brutally killed his pregnant wife and their two adorable daughters.
Daddy is a hero. Did he admit to you that he murdered his family?
He absolutely did.
Cheryl Lynn Cadle was fascinated by the case and started exchanging letters with Watts. Eventually, she started visiting him at a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. She spoke with Ann Mercogliano.
What was it like to meet him in person?
Very surreal. At times when he would talk about the murders, his eyes would turn so black. He just would get a different look on his face, and he talked about it so nonchalantly, like, going down to get a cup of coffee.
Watts' letters are filled with shocking confessions he never told the FBI, including that he had planned the murders for weeks and that he had secretly given his wife the painkiller OxyContin to end her pregnancy. He thought that would make it easier to leave her to be with his mistress, Nicole Kessinger. The reason the medical examiner found OxyContin in Shannon's system is because I gave it to her. I thought it would be easier to be with Nicole if Shanann wasn't pregnant.
He was very mesmerized by her. He just said in his letters that had it not been for her and the power that she had over him, she pulled at him constantly, that his family would still be alive today.
Watts murdered 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Cece at the oil field where he worked. But in his letters, he reveals he had tried to smother them hours earlier in their beds, but failed. I'm not sure how they woke back up, but they did. It makes the act that much worse. Cadle and her letters are featured in the Lifetime docuseries Cellmate Secrets, Chris Watts.
Do you have a sense of how he's doing today?
I don't think he's doing well right now. He has finally realized that he's going to be there for the rest of his life.